Welcome to another episode of the Back to School Shootings podcast. My name is David Reedman. I'm the creator of the K through 12 School Shooting Database, and I write the School Shooting Data Analysis and Reports Substack every week. Today, when you're listening to this, it's 7 years since the shooting in Parkland, Florida. And this is an incident, when you say Parkland, that pretty much everybody around the country and around the world knows what you're talking about. And it's a day that, I'm really linked to forever because it's the day when the K through 12 school shooting database started. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't know that 7 years later, it would still be something that I worked on every day. But that was the impetus to really understand this problem. And this was a problem that I, hadn't paid attention to, even though I should have. But that day, something changed for me. So I wanted to just record some of my thoughts about that day, the creation of the K through 12 school shooting database, what led up to it, and then what's happened since then. And I was looking back through these incidents since Parkland, the deliberately planned attacks, the mass shootings at schools, and there have been 38 of these incidents since Parkland. So I want to take some time to just talk through the basic details of each one, because I've been recording this stuff every day and it still shocks me to read them again and to remember what happened, and to realize, that this problem, maybe by the numbers is statistically rare, but to have 5 or 6 times a year somebody walk into a school heavily armed with the intent to harm a bunch of innocent people there, that's actually a pretty significant problem. So backing up now, so Parkland was Valentine's Day 2018, but the space for me to pay attention to that incident and to be ready to start a project like this actually happened the year prior. So in 2017, I was working in Washington, D.C. I was a federal government contractor, and I was working at an agency's office in D.C. every day. And it was a contract that required people to physically be in the office as one of the conditions of the contract, because this was before, COVID and so on. But when you have to be somewhere every day for kind of a nebulous contract, there's not always a lot of work to do every day. So in 2017, I started self-publishing articles on medium.com as just something to kind of help fill up my day and feel engaged and feel like I was contributing. But I wasn't really sure what to write about. I was a Homeland Security generalist. I wrote about emergency management. I wrote about terrorism. I wrote about project management. And, none of these articles really got any traction, but I was just starting to kind of learn this process to read and write and self-publish. And then on November 6th, 2017, that's when things kind of changed for me in this space. So I was on the metro, headed to work, and I'm reading the news from last night. And all of the news is about the Las Vegas Harvest Festival shooting. And since I had been in the Homeland Security space and the emergency management space, I had seen kind of the rise of run, hide, fight, and active shooter training. But as I'm reading about this, you have somebody firing rifles down at a crowd at a concert. You can't run because you can't outrun a bullet. You can't hide because you're out in this open street for the concert venue. And you can't fight somebody who's 40 stories up shooting down at you. So we've been preaching run, hide, fight for about a decade at this point. But in this situation, in the worst mass attack in U.S. history, you can't run, you can't fight, you can't hide. So I, got to the office around 7:30. I'd been on the DC Metro for an hour before that. I had a lot of thoughts to kind of put together. And I just sat down in about 45 minutes. I typed out an article that was called Active Shooter When You Can't Run, Hide, or Fight. Hit publish, went down to get some coffee, came back up to the office. It's still, around 9 o'clock. There's not really anybody there. A lot of days in these federal offices when people were on telework, they weren't in the office. A lot of people didn't come in until 9:30, 10, 11. It was extremely quiet, really, really low stimulus environment. So I get back on Medium. I want to see, what's going on with the article. And it had like 5,000 reads in the first hour. That had never happened before. Like I usually didn't get 5 reads in the first day, but I realized that this analysis had kind of struck the nerve because I talked about how there are all these places we go, concerts, nightclubs, malls, movie theaters, open offices, where this training to run, hide, fight is completely ineffective. So if that's completely ineffective, if you cannot take actions to protect yourself, then what can we do? And so from there, I was really paying more attention to mass shootings, to school shootings. And that then led to, the day that the Parkland shooting happened. I was really primed to be paying attention, to be thinking about this as an incident that could spur solutions. When I saw the news of that shooting, I wanted to come up with a threat assessment checklist, a very simple checklist that could be given to, any teacher, any school counselor, anyone to spot the warning signs that somebody was going to commit an attack. But unlike everything that had been created for the last 20 years, I didn't want to just throw a good idea or my gut assumption out there. I actually wanted to see how many incidents this checklist would have stopped. But that list wasn't available anywhere. So the start of the school shooting database back on February 14th, 2018, was pulling together information about as many school shootings as possible, the who, what, where, when, and why, to see if this checklist would have prevented the attack. And ultimately, that turned into just a project of its own because there was so much information to gather. The first iteration of the school shooting database that went public in September 2018 had 300 incidents, and they were coded for maybe 40 variables. Fast forward 7 years, it's more than 3,000 incidents that are coded for more than 300 variables. So the scope of this project has just expanded and expanded and expanded. And I never, got back to that prevention checklist because the data collection is such an onerous task on its own. But when you come to these different milestones, I thought that, today being 7 years after Parkland, it's kind of a time to look back and think about how we got here. And I want to start at the start of the 2017-18 school year because there are certain events over history that we think of as starting points, and Columbine gets talked about as a starting point all the time. But school shootings were a thing back to the 1960s. There were deliberately planned attacks every single decade, almost every school year, through this entire study period that I've looked at this. But kind of for the sake of time and focus, I'm just going to go through the deliberately planned attacks starting in that 2017-18 school year, leading up to Parkland. Because again, like I struggle back and forth with, yes, this is a statistical rarity, but then it's also not that rare. It's not like this happens once a year or once a decade. In some cases, it's, once a month. And we need to realize kind of how pervasive this issue is to take some meaningful steps to address it, or else this is going to keep happening. And we're going to have another episode about the 8th anniversary of Parkland and the 9th anniversary of Parkland and the 15 more incidents that happened since then, or the next watershed incident that becomes the cultural grounding point that everybody talks about. So September 13th, 2017, so just at the very start of the Parkland school year, a student opened fire at Freeman High School in Washington, and he'd been bullied and he opened fire in the hallway. And just a week after that, September 20th, 2017, at Madden High School in Illinois, a student who had been bullied and was planning to target a specific girl opened fire in the cafeteria. She wasn't there, so he just fired at random students. Then on December 7th, 2017, at Aztec High School in New Mexico, there was a former student who had studied prior school shootings, and he was intent on committing a planned attack. So he opened fire, he shot his way through a door and opened fire in the school office before fatally shooting himself. About a month later, into 2018 now, on January 22nd at Italy High School in Texas, a student wore a black trench coat into the school, and he opened fire. It was he had just broken up with a girl, but then that turned into a kind of planned attack, and it turned out he had previous episodes of violence and uh, the intent to cause harm. Then January 23rd, 2018, Marshall County High School in Kentucky. So this is 3 weeks before Parkland. There's a planned attack by a current student at that school. He has a handgun and he opens fire as all of the students are waiting in the entryway of the school before classes started. And he was a really bright kid, and he saw this shooting as a science experiment because he just wanted to know how people would react when he opened fire. Some of the court documents about it, he had a coin and he flipped the coin that morning to decide whether he was going to commit the shooting or not. So that's just 3 weeks before Parkland in Marshall County, Kentucky. February 14th, 2018, there's, the shooting at Parkland. The details are out there. We don't need to talk a lot about that one. Just 6 days later at Jackson Memorial Middle School in Ohio, there's a 13-year-old student goes into the bathroom. He had snuck a rifle into the school. He walked out, opened fire, but then immediately shot himself and killed himself. About 2 months later, on April 20th, 2018, there was a planned attack at Forest High School in Florida. And that was a student walked in with a guitar case and had guns inside of the guitar case. And he opened fire and then was taken into custody. About 2 weeks later, on May 11th at Highland High School in California, a former student opened fire at the school. It was right before the school resource officers' shift had started, so he fired 10 shots, but then he fled the campus and was apprehended just away from the school. 5 days after that, on June 16th at Dixon High School in Illinois, there was a student who planned a mass shooting during the graduation rehearsal. And as all the students were in the gym, he was headed into the building, and he just happened to run into a school police officer who was there and got into a shootout with the school police officer. But he was detained, but he had the intent to open fire during that graduation rehearsal at Dixon High School. Just 2 days after that, on May 18th, 2018, at Santa Fe High School in Texas, there was a planned attack by another current student at the school. He wore a black trench coat in. He had a shotgun. He opened fire in the hallways and went into some classrooms before a 30-minute standoff with police, and he ultimately surrendered. And then just a week after that, on May 25th, 2018, at Noblesville West Middle School in Indiana, there was a planned attack by a student. He walked into a classroom and pulled 2 guns, but the teacher just happened to be holding a basketball and threw the basketball at him. And then, while he was distracted in that second, the teacher was able to tackle him. But the teacher was shot 3 times, and that was, a major attack that was averted. So that's the end of that 17-18 school year. And going into the fall of 2018, December 13th at Dennis Intermediate School in Indiana, there was a planned attack by a 14-year-old student. He had a rifle, a pistol, and some Molotov cocktails and extensive planning documents. But he was confronted immediately. The school went on lockdown, and they found him just outside of a locked door trying to break into the school. Then on February 14th, 2019, so exactly a year after the Parkland shooting, at VSU Cleveland High School in New Mexico, there was a student who was intending to kill his ex-girlfriend in the school, but then he ended up opening fire in the hallway. But then he dropped the gun after the first shots and ran. Then in May 7th, 2019, at the STEM Highland Ranch School in Colorado. So this is a school that's just a couple miles from Columbine. There was a planned attack by two different students, an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. They snuck guns into the school, opened fire inside of a classroom and the hallway, and they were ultimately subdued by other students and staff at the school. Then in November of 2019, so November 14th, at Saugus High School in Southern California, there's a student opened fire in the courtyard. It's a mostly outdoor campus where the classrooms are all individual buildings and they have open air courtyards. So when the classes changed, this student opened fire and then shot himself. So he shot 5 students and killed himself in the space of about 16 seconds. Then into 2021, so in 2020 during COVID, students were not in school for a year, so there actually were not any planned attacks by students that took place. So sadly, it took completely closing schools for a year to have a year without any planned attacks. But once students were back, things started again. So on May 6th, 2021, at Rigby Middle School in Idaho, a 12-year-old student had 2 guns in her backpack, and she had a detailed plan where she wanted to kill 20 to 30 classmates and be, have the highest fatality count for any mass shooter. So this was a 12-year-old girl. She got ready in the bathroom, and when she came out of the bathroom, she opened fire in the hallway and shot 3 people, but a teacher just happened to be right there, come out of her classroom. And since this was a 12-year-old girl, just grab her in a bear hug and take the guns away. Then into October 12th, 2021, this is at Wendell Phillips Academy High School in Illinois. This is a school that has a secure campus where all of the doors are locked and there are guards and metal detectors and so on at the door. So on this day, when class is dismissed, there was a teen waiting outside of one of those exit doors with a ski mask and a gun. And right as the door opened, the SRO was the first one to walk out, and a student was right behind the SRO. And this masked teenager who's never been identified opened fire right there, shooting both the SRO and the student, and then fled from the scene immediately. Then around Thanksgiving 2021, November 30th, there's the shooting at Oxford High School in Oxford, Michigan, and 11 students were shot by a 15-year-old male student. That incident has a lot of coverage. There were a lot of missed warning signs. The 2 parents are in jail for buying their son, who was struggling with pretty severe mental illness and paranoia and delusions, and talked about violence and wanting to commit a school shooting, but they bought him a gun for Black Friday. In the spring of 2022 now, April 6th, at Ripley Middle School, there was a student who pulled a gun on the school bus and other students were able to tackle him. And it turned out that he was planning an execution on the school bus and planning to kill another kid. Then April 22nd, 2022, at the Edmund Burke School in Washington, D.C., this kind of comes full circle back to that first article that I wrote about what happens when you can't run, hide, or fight from the Las Vegas Harvest Festival shooting. There's a 23-year-old gunman. He rented the fifth floor apartment that overlooked this school campus in Washington, D.C., and it was a multi-building campus, and there was a glass bridge that connected two of the campus buildings, and this guy's apartment overlooked that glass bridge. So he had 5 different rifles, a scope that was set up to live stream, and about 1,000 rounds of ammunition. And right as the school was getting ready to dismiss, and there were students walking across that glass sky bridge, he opened fire, and he fired about 240 shots at the school in a 2-minute time period. And amazingly, there were 4 people that were wounded. I mean, this could have been easily, one of the worst school shootings or mass shootings or just acts of violence in world history. I mean, with that amount of ammunition and that concealed sniper, vantage point, he has the advantage over police officers. He can fire everywhere. He didn't know how to control these weapons, and he'd modified them for automatic fire. So most of the bullets ended up just fired into the air and missing the school and missing their targets. But it's pretty terrifying. I've watched the live stream video. You see him with the target sight over the students on the glass bridge, and then he opens fire. And what's really interesting about this case is almost always school shootings are highly personal. They're somebody with a direct connection to the campus, usually a current or former student. This was a 23-year-old guy that had no connections whatsoever to this school. He didn't leave a manifesto. It's really unclear to this day why he did it. And then if it couldn't get any stranger, after he opened fire in his apartment, he edited the Wikipedia page for the school to add an entry about his shooting, and then he killed himself. Why? Really don't know. A month after that, on May 24th, 2022, was the shooting at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. October 24th, 2022. So, the first fallback after Uvalde shooting. There's a planned attack at Central Visual and Performing Arts High School in St. Louis, Missouri. This was a 19-year-old former student. He had really struggled with mental health. His mother and sister were constantly trying to get him into treatment programs. He'd been hospitalized a number of times. He talked and wrote extensively about committing a school shooting. When he bought an AR-15 rifle, his mother called the St. Louis police and said, "My son has this rifle. He's gonna harm people." But based on Missouri's Second Amendment Preservation Act, officers aren't allowed to take a gun away from anyone, regardless of the reason. So despite his plan to commit a school shooting, police let him keep his AR-15 rifle. And then he walked into the school with 600 rounds and opened fire in the hallways. And he walked through the building until ultimately he stopped in a hallway for about 3 minutes, waited for police to find him. And then when officers found him, it was a suicide by cop. 2 months after that, on December 8th, 2022, at Facua Vriada Middle School in North Carolina, the teacher was teaching and all of a sudden heard a gunshot in the classroom. And there was a student who's holding a gun, and there's a hole through the window. And the teacher just immediately walked over and said, "Give me the gun," and took it away from the student. And it turned out this middle school student told the teachers, they're waiting for police to get there, that he hated everyone at the school and was planning to commit a school shooting, but was just in shock after that first shot was fired in the classroom, and didn't commit any further violence. Then in March 22nd, 2023, at East High School in Colorado, there's a student who had been seen with a gun on campus before, was on a special safety plan where the student would get patted down every day. The student had written and talked pretty extensively about his belief that it was his Second Amendment right to be able to carry a gun with him at school, and he was very political and far right. So there was normally a trained officer who would do the daily pat down, but that officer was out on leave one day, so there were two random school administrators who were asked to pat down the student, and when they attempted to do that, he shot both of them in a school office. And then he immediately fled from the school and committed suicide away from the building. 5 days after that, March 27th, 2023, there was the planned attack at the Covenant School in Nashville, Tennessee. And that was a former student that shot her way into the school with three different semi-automatic rifles and kind of roamed around the school campus until being killed in a shootout with the police. May 15th, 2023, Pinion Hills Elementary School, there was a report of shots fired near the school. This is in California, around 9 in the morning. And when police arrived at the school, they found a bunch of bullet holes in the side of the building. And they went to the house that had a clear view, and it turned out there was a guy who was severely mentally ill there, and he had 38 guns, including a number of assault rifles that had been illegally modified. And it's unclear what he was planning, but that morning he opened fire in the direction of the school, and a bunch of bullets at this occupied elementary school hit the building. I really put that in the near miss category of something that could have been significantly worse. The next day, so May 15th, 2023, at the Creative Science School in Oregon, there's a 13-year-old student who had been banned from the campus for previous behavioral issues. And he shows up with a helmet, like a military helmet, goggles, a tactical vest, and a handgun. And he starts threatening that he's going to commit a school shooting. This is a 13-year-old kid. And when police get there and they're able to talk him down and arrest him, it turns out that it's a replica handgun, not an actual handgun. But this was either something where he intended this to be a suicide by cop, or he really wanted to commit a school shooting, but being 13, he wasn't able to get a gun. But you can buy a replica handgun that looks identical to a real handgun on Amazon. That's another problem that I've written pretty extensively about. 4 days after that, May 19th, 2023, at Ballstrom High School in Arizona, a 15-year-old student had an AR-15 rifle, and he had disassembled it and had it in his pants and backpack. And he also had a lunchbox and another bag that were full of extra ammo. And they just happened to notice that something was off and search him and find this. But he had an AR-15 that was disassembled and a ton of extra ammo. So it appears that he had something pretty significant planned for that day, a 15-year-old student. About 3 weeks after that, June 6, 2023, at Huguenot High School in Richmond, Virginia. This was the school's graduation. There was a 19-year-old student who had been on a behavior plan, and he wasn't allowed to come to the campus. He'd been on remote-only learning based on threats and violence and some other issues. So he showed up at the graduation as everybody's leaving the ceremony, and he opened fire during the graduation. He killed a classmate, that classmate's father, and wounded 5 other parents and students who were there at the school. Now into the summer in July, this is July 31st, 2023, in Memphis, Tennessee, at the Hebrew Academy. There's a former student uh, with a handgun tried to enter the school, fired shots outside of the building, fired some shots at construction officers who were there. Then he fled from the campus and he was shot during a chase and pursuit and confrontation with police. And he was a graduate of that school, but his friends said that he had really struggled with a lot of mental illness, and he had just experienced possibly a psychotic episode and some behavior changes really recently. So it's unclear why he went to the school with a gun. He wasn't able to get in past an office because the door was locked. It was the summer, so there were a limited number of students on campus anyway. But yeah, that was quite an incident for a random summer day. Into 2024, January 4th, the first day back from winter break, Perry Middle and High School in Iowa. There was a 17-year-old student. He got to school early. He took a duffel bag into the school, went into the bathroom, and in there he had a pump action shotgun and a handgun. He got onto a Discord group, which was the school shooting massacre discussion. He talked to some other group members, got kind of pumped up and ready for the attack, and then he opened fire in the hallway. And he ended up killing the principal, killing a classmate, and wounding, I think, 5 others before he killed himself. So that school had a panic button, had a security plan, but this happened at 7:37 in the morning. So it was before everybody is there and set up, and a very small town in Iowa. It's pretty close to the police station, but he was dead before the first police officer even arrived on campus. A month later, February 19th, 2024, Pioneer Technology and Arts Academy in Texas. Police were called to the school because there's a 16-year-old student who was alone inside a school office with a gun. So he came into the school office. He was not mentally well. He had the gun. The administrators were able to talk to him, get out of the office, and then kind of get to the hallway and just keep him in the office by himself. And he ultimately got into a shootout with police officers before he was taken into custody. April 13th, 2024, at Irving Park Elementary School in North Carolina. On the weekend at 6 in the morning, a 26-year-old man broke into the school and roamed around the hallways with an AR rifle. And he, just kind of looked completely lost. He was in the school for an extended period of time because it was the weekend and nobody knew that he was there. But it was reported that he had said that there were voices in his head and they were telling him to do something bad. So he may have been in such a state of psychosis that he didn't realize what day of the week or what time it was. So it seems that he went to this school with the intent to cause harm, and it was just luck that it happened to be a weekend morning when he was there. Then on May 1st, 2024, at Mount Horeb Middle School in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, police get a call for an active shooter on campus, and there's a 14-year-old student who has a rifle who's outside of the cafeteria, and he's banging on the window and pointing the rifle at students. So he's shot and killed by police. It turns out that it was a pellet rifle rather than a real rifle But this was a student who was obsessed with school shootings. He had written extensively about school shootings, about wanting to be a school shooter. He'd convinced his parents to take him to the site of another school shooting, and he talked about the power of being at that school and at that site where the shooting had happened. And he also assembled Molotov cocktails, pipe bombs, and he bought some radiological material online. It's just a small quantity material that's used to calibrate lab equipment. But he'd combine that with one of his pipe bombs. So he was really trying to commit a dirty bomb attack at the school as well. So this was a kid with serious intent, with years of warning signs, but he couldn't get access to a real weapon. And that's the only reason that this wasn't an extremely deadly incident. On June 6, 2024, at Garfield High School, there was this is in Washington and Seattle, a student entered a classroom in a ski mask with an AR-15 rifle and said he was going to shoot everyone, but then ran out of the school. And it turned out that it was a replica AR-15 rifle. But during the lockdown, as police are searching everyone, they end up finding another student with a gun at the school, completely unrelated. So you've got this student with a ski mask and an AR-15 terrorizing a classroom, and then it turns out there's a kid who's a habitual gun carrier at the school who gets wrapped up in that as well. On July 25th, 2024, at West Marion Primary School, a 76-year-old man came into the school with a gun, and he started threatening two staff members, and he made them stand against the wall of the school. And as that's happening, a janitor sees him and tackles him and is able to hold him down until police get there and detain him. On September 4th, 2024, there's a planned attack at Appalachia High School in Georgia. This was a 14-year-old student who brought an AR-15 into the school inside a poster board. And then he opened fire in the hallway of the school after being excused to go to the bathroom. Then on November 7th, 2024, at Roosevelt Elementary School in Wisconsin, a 13-year-old student showed up with a backpack and a duffel bag, and he tried to get into the side doors of the school, but then he ran away as school staff noticed him and he got there. And then as police start investigating, they find social media pictures of him posing with firearms and with a rifle. So they locate him, and it turns out that he's arrested, but the guns in his pictures were, again, realistic replica guns, not real guns. But what is this 13-year-old kid doing at 9 a.m. at an elementary school, showing up with a duffel bag and a backpack and dark clothing? Clearly, he's either attempting a suicide by cop or he's trying to simulate the act of a school shooting, even if he couldn't get the actual weapons to commit it. Then on December 4th, 2024, at the Feather River Adventist School in California, an adult man makes an appointment at the school to say that he wants to enroll a student there. He went to an Adventist school, so it's kind of a really legit backstory. He gets to the school, meets with the principal, does a tour. During the tour, says he needs to use the bathroom. When he comes out of the bathroom, he has a gun and he opens fire, critically injuring two kids that are on the playground before he commits suicide and kills himself. 2 weeks after that, December 12th, 2016, December 16th, 2024, at Abundant Life Christian School in Madison, Wisconsin, a girl opens fire inside her classroom and then commits suicide before police arrived. Had two different handguns. Only one of them was fired during the attack. And it turns out she was involved in school shooting chat rooms. She was involved in some neo-Nazi and far-right kind of hate-based content, and she really glorified the Columbine shooters. She wore the T-shirt all over with the same band that was in the Columbine basement tapes. So a lot of missed warning signs there. And then finally, we get to the most recent incident that's happened this year. So on January 22nd, 2025, Antioch High School in Tennessee, there's a 17-year-old student who was connected online to the girl who opened fire at the Abundant Life Christian School in Madison just a month earlier. He was also into neo-Nazi and far-right content, and he opened fire in the cafeteria right as lunch was starting. And he killed one student and grazed two others before he killed himself. But he had two different documents online. One was about 50 pages, and another was almost 300 pages, where he talked about school shootings, mass shootings. He took pictures of himself in the same poses as prior school shooters. He wore the same clothing as prior school shooters and mass shooters. He commented on the Twitter profiles and different pages of people that were school shooters and mass shooters. And he wrote in his document that he planned to kill at least 10 people that day. So it's really not clear why he killed himself, within seconds after the first shots were fired. But that was a pretty significant incident, and also a pretty significant near miss. So this episode was a little different from any of the others that I've recorded, but it just seemed like a fitting time 7 years after Parkland to just take a look back at everything that's happened here, everything that's happening in schools each week. And I mean, these are only the actual times that shots are fired on campus. I also keep track of averted shootings and near misses. And there are dozens of those for every actual attack that happens. So I would hope that everybody remains vigilant. Everybody continues to realize that even though there are so many different problems in the world that take our attention, this is a very significant one that continues to need resources and dedicated systems and information sharing to try to make sure that when there are warning signs, people are able to make a report, and then something is done with that report. Because every one of these 38 incidents that I went through, almost all of them had an opportunity for the incident to be stopped before somebody ever brought a gun to school. Nobody needs to get shot at a school. That's a status quo that we don't have to maintain. So I hope that hearing this, with thinking about kind of how far we've come, but how far we still need to go, that this is something that will get your attention and hopefully spur people to make some useful policy changes, and somebody to finally create a single unified threat reporting system so that we can investigate and report and stop these incidents from happening. So thank you all for listening. Feel free to leave any comments on this. Let me know what you think. And, my thoughts go out to all the victims and the families of the people that Valentine's Day is never the same because, they lost a loved one, or they witnessed a shooting, or they experienced the trauma of Parkland 7 years ago. We should also take a few minutes and remember that that same experience happens at hundreds of other campuses, hundreds of other places. And then this doesn't even count all the mass shootings that happen in public. So I hope that we can finally bring about some meaningful change to this at some point. Thank you all.